G'day blokes and Sheilas, this is Voyager the Second here. Today we are back with another episode of Fixing Public Transport in New South Wales. In today's episode I have a new timetable plan for Sydney trains, perhaps 2023, but the thing is, this is actually not the final timetable plan. The next video that I will be releasing after this is going to be another project for Sydney, and therefore this project will actually have to change the timetable up again. But anyway, without further ado, let's begin this timetable showcase. So, what are the changes, the positive changes to the new timetable? Well, we have about 15 of these changes. I won't go through any of them. You know, you can just have a read of that yourself. And so yeah, you just have a read of that yourself. You can pause the video now if you want to. If you want to check, have a quick read of these, see all the benefits. And so yeah, these are all the positive changes to the timetable. But because just because there are positive changes to the timetable does not mean there are no negative changes to the timetable. There are also negative changes to the timetable. You know, we can't always provide a good rail service for everyone. Okay, you know, these are some of the negatives of the timetable. Some of them are just minor negative changes, but some of them could actually be really bad. Like, for example, you know, you have no direct services for Birrong or Yagoona customers to the city, you know, because of the Sydney Metro. So you can just have a quick look at those. Some of them are actually very insignificant negative changes, but yeah, so these are the negative changes to the timetable. But to make this timetable a reality, we need to have a few works needed for the timetable, okay? So we will have signalling upgrades across the rail network, accommodating a 2-minute gap between trains instead of just a 3-minute gap, you know. Although we will maintain like an average of 3-minute gap between trains, but we need to make the signal accommodate a 2-minute gap because there's some parts of the network where the trains are actually quite close to each other. So yeah. There's also quadruplication of the North Main Line between West Ryde and Strathfield, a possible rail extension to Badgerys Creek from Leppington, and also to make the timetable a reality, if you've found how there's going to be faster services between Wollongong and the city, we will need a 21km waterfall to Austin Mere rail tunnel. Which is actually much better than building a bloody new motorway, mate, because that motorway is just a bloody rip-off. Building an F6 motorway don't work, Gladys, okay? Build a 21km rail line. Much cheaper, much more beneficial to the Illawarra. You don't need a road, okay? You don't need another road. Build another rail line. Faster journey times between Wollongong and Sydney. Full stop. Now, there is also an option for a Unanderra to Dapto duplication, but it may not really be needed after all, though, because it's only a small area, a small portion of single track, and we can still accommodate bi-directional trains, even though there will be 4 trains an hour going from Dapto to Unanderra on that single track. So now we have the timetable. This is the main Suburban line proposal. Okay, this is after Sydney Metro Stage 2. So one full line represents a stopping pattern which will be repeated every 15 minutes, and broken lines which are shown between Hornsby and Berowra, Blacktown and Riverstone, Blacktown and St Mary's, and between Emu Plains and Penrith. I actually tried to just take a joke there, Penrith. I'm sorry if you apologies to those who do live in Penrith, because you know, I just wanted to take it as a good joke, okay? But I hope it doesn't offend anyone from Penrith, okay? But anyhow, these are all the this is the timetable, the stopping pattern. One line's going to be a timetable cycle which will be repeated every 15 minutes. And so now we will have a look at the stopping patterns for the northern main line, and a brief look at the Central Coast Newcastle line. So we will have 4 trains an hour from the Central Coast line, which still is normal, but they will have to be slightly slower as they will be stopping at West Ryde to serve the to which would be part of my new Sydney Metro between Sydney and Parramatta. Okay, but we will have 8 trains per hour from the Northern Line to the city. However, which is Suburban, 8 trains per hour, 8 Suburban trains per hour using the Northern Line. I'm not sure about having the arrive here and then departing afterwards. I think it probably isn't needed. Because if we're gonna have a line that's completely 4 tracks between Epping and Strathfield, we probably don't need this train to have a stopover at Epping, let this train overtake. We don't really need that. You know, we could just let the train just keep continuing its journey without having a long break. But yeah, and then we also have this benefit of Barara commuters and the rest of the North Main Line. You know, they don't need to change trains at either Hornsby or Epping to get those express service to get to other places on the North Main Line. You know, you have this direct. You now can have direct services. Well, mostly direct services. But yeah, this is the North Main Line for you, blokes and Sheilas. So this is now the southwest stopping pattern. Now there's actually going to be a lot of negatives to the changes. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but there will be plenty of negatives to the timetable change. Firstly, you can see here that, but the first benefit is that you can have direct services from Parramatta to the inner western suburbs with a train every 15 minutes from Parramatta. And this also adds to the 20 trains per hour that you can get from Parramatta into the inner city. But this comes at an expense for southwest Sydney commuters, especially for those who live like in those suburbs between Marylands and Glenfield, and also up to the Badgerys Creek Airport. You know, you'll have painfully slow trips through the inner western suburbs because there will be stops. You will have stops in some of the inner western suburbs lines. You know, so that is the negative there. But again, with the new project that I have in mind, I'll tell you more about it in the next episode. You will actually get your comfort of having faster services into the city once again with the new project. So I promise that this pain won't last forever. And now for the western line, here there are a few new benefits. Although some stopping patterns will remain unchanged, there are going to be a few new benefits. Instead of having 2 trains per hour on the Richmond line, you'll now have 4 trains per hour for commuters between Blacktown and Richmond. But I also forgot to mention that we may need a bit of duplication on the Richmond line. If previously in this video, like I said, how there's going to be like you know, like a duplication project, some of the projects required. Well, the duplication of the Richmond line is also a project that is required. You know, I forgot to add a yellow square there at Clyde, but there will be, but this is what this stopping pattern. These two stopping patterns will serve Clyde Station with a train every 15 minutes. And this is just a quick overview of the Blue Mountains line. I forgot to mention as well that like every second express train to Penrith, one will extend to Emu Plains, while it will replace one Blue Mountain service, while the other Blue Mountain service will stop at Emu Plains, which will come from Katoomba. I know I'm just speaking gobbledygook here, but yeah, later eventually I'll learn how to improve the way I talk, because it's a bit gobbledygook right now. I'm sorry, blokes and Sheilas. But now on to the main south, the main southern, and the Illawarra stopping patterns. It's still the a full line will be a train every 15 minutes, and a dotted line will be a train every 30 minutes. So you can just have a look at that yourself. I'm not going to explain too much of that now, but you can still see that we can bring about 40 trains per hour from this region, this entire region here into the city. 40 trains per hour. That's plenty. And so what else is there to see here? So we'll now look at the stopping patterns for these lines here. For the peak hour on the St George's Sutherland Shire line, I call it the St George's Sutherland Shire, while most of you call it the Eastern Suburbs and Illawarra line. But this is actually not. This has nothing to do with the Eastern Suburbs. These stations here, but you'd probably refer to it as the Illawarra line, but really it's not the Illawarra line. I would refer to it as the Sutherland Shire line, because because it goes through suburbs in the Sutherland Shire. You have to go further south to get to the Illawarra. I'd prefer to call the South Coast line as the Illawarra line, those intercity lines here. So what you can see here in advance now, this is a 30-minute cycle, this entire timetable. So what you can see is that there's now going to be a train every 15 minutes instead of a train every 20 minutes from Wollongong. You can have an express service from Wollongong to the city every 15 minutes now. Currently, it's you have a train every 20 minutes, but with that frequency between Wollongong and the city, those trains are going to get really packed. But if you have a train every 15 minutes, it should alleviate plenty of the capacity. There are going to be additional services. There's going to be plenty of additional services in certain parts of the line. However, the Cronulla branch will remain having 6 trains per hour. It currently does, but we'll just have to keep it at 6 trains per hour because we can't really do much about it. But there are going to be additional services between Walleye Creek and Hurstville. You'll have a train now every 7 to 8 minutes, or you'd have 8 trains per hour on the line, which is quite beneficial. However, it's not just these. Also, going back to the Illawarra line services, it's not just these express trains that Wollongong commuters can choose. They can also choose the slower but the more scenic rides, from which are the Thurrool Port Kembla services. I will go into these into more detail later in this video. And also, instead of a train every 20 minutes between Sutherland and Helensburgh, it's now a train instead of a train every 20 minutes between Sutherland and Helensburgh, it's now a train every 15 minutes, possibly 4 trains per hour. And instead of just terminating at Waterfall, the trains now extend to Helensburgh, just to compensate for the loss of services on the Illawarra Express services, which will no longer stop at Helensburgh due to the new tunnel that would be built. And now for the East Hills line, for the airport and East Hills line. So the new benefits include you can now have direct trains from Leppington to the city via the airport, and there's also the benefit of a new of direct services from the Southern Highlands into Central. Currently, that isn't possible at the moment, but with this new timetable, you can now have a train every 15 minutes from the Southern Highlands into the city. Well, that's the maximum frequency. Now, not all stations in the Southern Highlands will get the luxury of a train every 15 minutes. I'm sorry to say that. It is for a few stations though. So, to those stations, well, um, yeah, you're lucky. But there are going to be a few additional services between Revesby and Walleye Creek, especially between Riverwood and Walleye Creek. So currently there's a train every 15 minutes between Riverwood and Walleye Creek, but I plan to have, instead of just 4 trains an hour, I want to do 6 trains per hour, because 4 trains an hour is just not enough to for those commuters. You know, they need plenty of trains because they're quite close to the city. Yeah. So yeah. But otherwise, a lot of these services will remain. A lot of the services from MacArthur and Campbelltown will remain unchanged. They would. There's nothing really going to change about them. So yeah, that's the East Hills line. And now for the North Shore line. This wasn't shown on the map, but this is for between. This goes through the wealthy suburbs of the North Shore. What you can see here is that basically the timetable will remain unchanged. Okay, so but Barara and Asquith will lose a few services because you know, they have the option to catch the trains, the slower services instead. I know it's quite awful, but you know, you have other options, you know. And also, Central Coast trains are actually already quite full, so just don't catch them Barara and Asquith, okay? Um, Now for the lower North Shore, you know, there's going to be reduced services, unfortunately, for you between Chatswood and the city. Currently have 20 trains per hour, but I'm going to have to cut it down to 16 trains per hour. This was because you've lost your trains, like because the Northern Line is now using Sydney Metro. However, for those who live in Chatswood, St Leonards and North Sydney, you know, you have the option to catch the Sydney Metro, which means you can have a train every 4 or even 2 minutes in the peak hour. You know, you still have those you have a second option, but you will have to lose North Shore services while you've got the Sydney Metro available for you. Okay, so that's the North Shore line. It's not really going to change between Chatswood and Hornsby. And now for the T5 Cumberland line. So this is what it's gonna. This is the structure of the Cumberland line. There isn't really much change to it. I'm sorry if it's not going to go to Leppington, even though Transport Minister Andrew Constance wants it to go to Leppington. But yeah, unfortunately, it won't go to Leppington because, you know, you have plenty of trains to Leppington already. But for the other commuters in the southwestern region, you know, you have the luxury of catching a direct train service to Parramatta. So yeah, and that's the Cumberland line for you. And now we'll be looking at the intercity lines. Yes, that Penrith meme again. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone here, but anyhow. So the Blue Mountains line will remain stagnant. The stopping patterns, the frequencies on the Blue Mountains line will remain unchanged, but I know that there will be upgrades to the Blue Mountains line due to the new intercity fleet program. And it's also the same with the Central Coast and Newcastle line. You know, not much is going to change, but I will have to explain a bit of the stopping pattern. It seems like there's going to be 4 trains an hour to Newcastle, even though there's actually only going to be two comfortably direct services. One of them's actually going to have to stop over at Gosford. But you have the new luxury for Southern Highlands commuters to catch a train to Central, and even Canberra commuters would have the new benefit of catching a train to Central every 60 minutes in the peak and every 2 hours in the off peak. You don't need to. I know it's quite an awful benefit, but really, currently, for you commuters at Canberra, you can't use your Opal card to catch a train to Central. You need to book a ticket, which is a lot more expensive and a lot more inconvenient. But with this new service for you, you get to have those new benefits. And also for the Illawarra line, you could have four express trains from Wollongong to the city every hour per hour, and you have the choice to catch the Port Kembla services to Central, which will use the slower route, which is more scenic. And so let's look at the Central Coast and Newcastle line first. So we have the slow via Strathfield services and the express via Strathfield services. You can obviously see that the express via Strathfield services start all the way up from Newcastle. Now, for the North Shore services, so these Newcastle services will have to stop over at Gosford in order to let another train overtake this train, and then this train service will continue as the Gosford to Central via Gordon Express. And there's also the Wyong to Central via Gordon Express, which already exists. So there isn't really much change. This also does exist, by the way, so really there isn't really much change to the Central Coast and Newcastle line, except that the Gosford to Central via Strathfield slow service will have a set down stop at Asquith. And this is for the peak hour stopping patterns for the Blue Mountains. Nothing really has changed, except that you'll have a train from Lithgow every half an hour, and they will not be stopping at Emu Plains, so that they could have a slightly faster trip, but maybe there isn't really much benefits. I know that they are going to upgrade the Blue Mountains line in order to accommodate the wider new intercity trains. So yeah, and so basically that's it for the Blue Mountains line. A train every 15 minutes. There's plenty of trains available for especially for a low population area like the Blue Mountains. And now we have a quick look at the Southern Highlands line. Some trains will only get a train every hour, others will have a train every 30 minutes, and some will even have trains every 15 minutes, like Mossvale, Bowral, and Mittagong. These are the only stations in the Southern Highlands that will have a train every 4 trains an hour, basically. But they have plenty of options. Other stations won't have much options, but you should be grateful, guys, that you can now have direct services to Central rather than just having to be forced to change at Campbelltown. So yeah, so that's the Southern Highlands line. And for the South Coast line, so these two services are going to be the express services from Wollongong or Dapto or Kiama to the city. This service is going to connect with this service and this service. These two services are going to be the Port Kembla to Central scenic route. Some commuters can choose to take this route if they wish. Others would rather, but in the peak hour, most would rather prefer to catch the express that goes through the Austin Mere to waterfall tunnel. So yeah, that's the South Coast line. And so now we'll just have a quick look at the vehicular movements through Central per hour. So you can see that with Sydney Metro, so the blue represents Sydney Metro, the brighter orange represents Sydney Trains, the darker orange represents New South Wales Trainlink, and the red represents Sydney Light Rail. Now these numbers represent how many vehicles per hour are going to be coming from that direction into the city, which is this whole area right here. So you can see that's, so yeah, just saying how many trains per hour is going through. And at the next slide we can show you how many trains per hour would actually be going, how many passengers in the peak period, which is going to last 2 hours, how many people we could actually move through the city. So next slide. So by calculating all of these numbers and the approximations per train of how many passengers per train, I've calculated that in total we will have about 661,680 passenger movements by train through the city per 2 hours. This is on the 2-hour peak period. But remember, not all of those 661,000 commuters are actually going to get off the city. Some people will actually have to go through the city in order to get to their workplaces in places like Chatswood, North Sydney, and St Leonards, or even Parramatta. For those who live in the North Shore, some of them have to actually go through the city. But maybe let's say if that was 15% of all the commuters that go through the city, that would possibly, we could still have about, like, let's say 550,000 people who catch the train to the city, who will catch the train to the city. And remember that it's also not just trains and heavy rail, Sydney Metro and light rail which will be where all the passengers are going to go. There's also the ferries, and then there's also the buses. So there's also a lot more people, not rather than just those 660,000 that are going to be working in the city. And so this is the end of the timetable now. Anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and favorite the video. I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.